Hi, another Mrs. H Psychology revision video. This time it's on memory and specifically essay question on outline and discuss the multi-store model of memory. So if we have a look at this, if you're going to start this for an essay question, you're obviously going to outline first of all. So my recommendation is to do a quick sketch. But the key things, even if you do or don't do the sketch, you need to refer to how the memory transfers from sensory, or from the stimuli around, through sensory, through short term into long term. In other words, that you need to say that it moves from sensory by attention to get into short term memory. And in order to get from short term to long term, we have to have rehearsal. So this little model doesn't have the word rehearsal. It's really important that you do refer to rehearsal. Okay, so we have rehearsal, we have retrieval back to short term, we have a little rehearsal loop here, but the key thing is to get from sensory to short term we have to pay attention, to get from short term to long term we have to rehearse it according to this model. Okay, and then you would refer to the different capacity, in other words how much, duration, how long, and encoding how it's processed for the different stores, the sensory register, the short-term and the long-term memory. You don't need all of them. I've put details on here. Keywords, it's important to use the keywords like unlimited, infinite, etc. Okay, but just pick out some examples. So that would give you enough for outlining it. With my guys in the mock exam, some of you said that different memory stores encode either semantically or acoustically. Be careful with that. They don't just encode semantically or acoustically. It's mainly, so short term is mainly acoustic encoding, long term is mainly semantic, but there are other ways obviously of encoding, otherwise we wouldn't have any memories. Okay, so just be careful with that with my guys with their mock exam. So we need to then go on to what's our evidence to support this. Okay, so you can pause the screen and take your time over this, but I'm just going to run through them really quickly. So Murdoch's primacy recency effect shows there are different memory stores. So words at the start were rehearsed into and went into long-term memory, and therefore primacy effect. Words at the end still in short-term memory, therefore the recency effect. But really key thing is it's shown that there are different memory stores. So you don't need to describe the whole study, just pick out this. Miller's work on capacitive short-term memory, giving lists of digits to participants that they had to recall, and most of them recalled 5 to 9. In other words, showing limited capacity of short-term memory, 7 plus or minus 2 units. Badley's work using lists of acoustically similar and semantically similar words, and either immediate or delayed recall. And he found that the acoustically similar words were more likely to be confused when on immediate recall. In other words, they're using short-term memory, and semantically similar were more likely to be confused on a delayed recall, in other words using long-term memory. So you can also refer to my other little one of my other videos on this as well, but thus showing that processing is mostly acoustic and mostly semantic, acoustic for short-term and semantic for long-term. We've also got clinical case studies like HM. HM study supports this model because his short-term memory continued to function, but he couldn't get information into long term, therefore that flow wasn't really working, and again it's evidence for two separate stores. We've also got evidence for duration of short-term memory, for example Peterson with trigrams, which you've got here as well. Okay, so plenty of research. These are just examples. There are loads of different pieces of research, but I would just home in on some detail from these. Further evaluation though, the counter-argument is there are clinical studies to counter the theory. So for example, KF showed that short-term memory is not just one passive store. For example, KF's memory for digits was poor when he was read the digits, but much better when he read them himself, and therefore it shows that there are different short-term stores. In other words, a visual store and a sound acoustic store even in just short-term memory. Criticisms over the rehearsal idea. So Craig et al. So there are different sorts of rehearsal. We can't just say we rehearse. There's maintenance, which probably keeps it in short-term memory, and elaborative, which is going to shift it in. Sorry, maintenance keeps it in short-term memory. Elaborative, which shifts it into long-term memory. So remember, elaborative is linking to existing knowledge, thinking about the meaning, and therefore that has real practical applications. For example, helping students to learn. We can also make comparisons with the working memory model. So short-term memory, as described in the working memory model, is very active processing. You could outline, the different types. So we've got central executive, which controls the other slave systems. But in the multi-store model, it is just a very passive store. Another problem is the artificiality of all the materials used in these lab experiments. Peterson's trigrams, Baddeley's word lists, whatever. They're not what we have to learn in the real world. So they do lack mundane realism, and therefore they will lack validity. Okay, there are lab studies which have lovely control, and therefore we get good replication. So they help, to promote it scientifically, this model. But actually in the real world, perhaps lists of shopping or something like that may be more realistic. We also have problems with the rehearsal element. We know that, for example, flashbulb memories for highly emotional events don't seem to need rehearsal. They go straight into long-term memory in a very detailed form. But this multi-store model expects memories to be rehearsed, or says that memories have to be rehearsed to enter the long-term memory. And finally, there are limits over long-term memory. For example, different types of long-term memory. We know we have procedural, we have semantic, we have episodic, so different types of long-term memory. We know that because of people like Clive Waring, case study with Clive Waring with his amnesia. He was still able to produce, or so to use procedural memory, in other words, playing the piano, but he didn't have episodic recall, so memory for personal events. And the multi-store model just refers to long-term memory as a general long-term store. It doesn't go into the detail of the different types. So there's plenty of evaluative points really there. This was on a MART scheme. This is just a really quick outline of what they had in the MART scheme. So that wraps up multi-store model pretty much.